There are places in Canada so disturbing that they've been sealed off forever, and what happened inside should never have seen the light of day. Have you ever wondered why certain buildings are abandoned with such urgency that no one, absolutely no one, is allowed to enter? We're not talking about ordinary buildings. We're talking about psychiatric hospitals where screams echoed for decades, where inhumane treatments were considered medicine, and where secrets so dark were buried that authorities preferred to lock the doors forever rather than face the truth. Canada holds within its borders some of the most terrifying places in North America. Behind dilapidated facades and broken windows lies a history of suffering that goes far beyond any horror movie you've ever seen. Because true horror doesn't need special effects when reality is already disturbing enough. We're talking about places where people have been forgotten, where medical experiments crossed every imaginable ethical line, and where the concept of humanity simply ceased to exist. Today, we're going to tell you about the 7 most terrifying abandoned psychiatric hospitals in Canada. Stick with me until the end, because number 1 will genuinely keep you up at night, and I'm not exaggerating. We'll uncover stories from the empty corridors of these monuments to human suffering, discover what really happened behind those thick walls, and understand why these places are now guarded so closely. Have you ever walked past an abandoned place and felt that inexplicable chill down your spine? Multiply that feeling by 1,000. If you enjoy dark mysteries, true stories that challenge our understanding of the past, and places that carry the weight of forgotten tragedies, like this video and subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to discover goes far beyond urban legends or ghost stories. And also activate the notification bell to stay up to date on all the stories and mysteries of Canada that nobody dares to tell you. We're talking about documented facts, real testimonies, and evidence that has been hidden for decades. Prepare to discover places where the line between medical treatment and torture simply disappeared, where children and adults were subjected to the unimaginable, all in the name of science and social order. Let's begin our countdown at number 7, and as we progress, the intensity only increases. What you're about to discover may surprise you, shock you, and definitely change your perspective. Let's go straight to number 7 on our countdown. And I'll tell you right now that even though it's 7th place, the impact of this story will make you question many things about how society treated vulnerable people just a few decades ago. We're talking about Ponoka Provincial Psychiatric Hospital, located in Alberta, a province that many associate with incredible natural landscapes and modern cities. But hidden in this same region, there is a place that carries one of the most disturbing stories in Canadian medicine. Opened in 1911, this hospital began as a promise of modern treatment for mental illness. But the reality behind those walls was completely different from what the population imagined. Within Ponoka, electroshock therapy was applied without any real scientific basis. Patients were subjected to intense electric shocks, often without anesthesia, as a way to correct behaviors considered inappropriate by the society of the time. And when electricity wasn't enough, doctors performed lobotomies without the consent of the patients or their families. Imagine the brutal transformation this caused in the lives of these people. Irreversible brain surgery, performed with rudimentary instruments that left patients in a permanent vegetative state. All of this was called treatment. All of this was considered medicine. The scandals of negligence began to leak to the public in the 70s and 80s, when former employees finally had the courage to speak about what really happened in the dark corridors of Ponoka. Accounts of patients tied to beds for days on end, deprived of food as punishment, locked in tiny rooms without adequate ventilation. The truth, hidden for decades, began to emerge, and with it, the pressure to close the hospital. But even after the partial closure, something remained in that place. Employees who worked on the demolition of some wings of the hospital report experiences that defy any logical explanation. Screams coming from empty walls, objects moving on their own during the night, an oppressive feeling of being constantly watched. Today, Ponoka is partially demolished, with restricted areas surrounded by fences and danger signs. Authorities do not allow public access, citing structural safety concerns, but local residents whisper of other reasons. They say there are things inside that are better left alone, memories so dense they seem to have been imprinted on the very air of that place. But the journey through the dark underbelly of Canadian psychiatry is only just beginning. Moving up to number 6, we find the Tranquil Sanatorium, located in Kamloops, British Columbia. And here, the story takes an even more sinister turn. Originally built in 1907 to treat tuberculosis patients, Tranquil seemed, at least on paper, a place of hope and healing. Tuberculosis was a devastating epidemic at the time, and sanatoriums like this were sold as havens of recovery, with fresh mountain air and specialized treatment. But when tuberculosis began to be controlled with antibiotics in the following decades, Tranquil needed a new purpose. And that's when the decisions made by the administration transformed the place into something completely different. The sanatorium was converted into a psychiatric hospital, and with this change came a series of dubious medical experiments that were never fully documented or explained. Patients were subjected to extreme isolation, locked in windowless rooms for weeks or months at a time, as a form of treatment for conditions that were often not even properly diagnosed. The psychological impact of this type of isolation is devastating, and many patients never recovered. But perhaps the most chilling detail of Tranquil is the cemetery located on the hospital grounds. 300 graves, 300 people buried there, and most of them unidentified. No names, no dates, no families to claim the bodies. Who were these people? How did they die? Why didn't anyone come to claim them? The revelations about Tranquil don't stop there. Subsequent investigations uncovered a network of underground tunnels connecting all the buildings in the complex. Officially, these tunnels served to transport supplies during the region's harsh winter. But testimonies from former employees suggest that the tunnels had a much darker purpose. Patients were moved through these underground passages, away from the public eye. And there are unconfirmed reports that some were never seen again after being taken down. Today, Tranquil is completely abandoned, surrounded by signs that strictly prohibit entry. The Canadian government keeps the area under surveillance, and trespassers are prosecuted severely. But even so, curious individuals and paranormal investigators regularly attempt to enter, drawn by the stories surrounding the place. Now, if you're feeling that chill down your spine with these first two stories, comment below. This is real, because believe me, we're only scratching the surface of what happened in these places, and as we move forward in our countdown, the intensity of what you're about to discover only increases, and the line between medicine and cruelty becomes increasingly blurred. Moving on to number 5, we need to talk about a place that has become so iconic in the horror genre that Hollywood literally knocked on its door. Riverview Hospital, also known as Estendale, located in Coquitlam, British Columbia, was the largest psychiatric complex in all of Canada. Opened in 1913 and operating until 2012, this place spanned an entire century of history, witnessing profound changes in society, medicine, and mentality about mental health. But within those walls, the transformation was much slower. If you've ever watched series like Supernatural or The X-Files, you've probably seen the corridors of Riverview without even realizing it. Hollywood producers chose this place precisely because the atmosphere there is genuinely disturbing. Even without special effects, the impact Riverview had on the lives of thousands of people is impossible to fully calculate. At its peak, the hospital housed 4,600 patients at any one time. Think about that for a moment. 4,600 human beings, each with their own story, their own struggles, locked in a complex where overcrowding made any pretense of humane treatment completely impossible. Staff worked grueling shifts without adequate training, supervising hundreds of patients simultaneously. The hidden truth behind the official statistics was that many of these patients lived in subhuman conditions, sleeping on mattresses on the hallway floors when there were no longer enough beds. But within Riverview there was a particularly sinister place, something even the staff avoided mentioning in casual conversation. The Chris Center was the maximum security wing, intended for so-called criminally insane individuals, people who had committed violent crimes while dealing with severe mental illness. Decisions about who was sent to Chris were often arbitrary, based more on prejudice and fear than on proper psychiatric evaluations. Within that wing, solitary confinement cells were used, not as a last resort, but routinely. Patients spent days, weeks, sometimes months, locked alone in tiny rooms, without stimulation, without human interaction, slowly losing the connection to the reality they still possessed. And it is precisely in Chris that one of the most persistent urban legends about Riverview emerges. Patients consistently reported seeing a figure that became known as the Woman in White. Descriptions varied, but the essence was always the same: a woman wearing a long white dress, appearing in the hallways at night, walking silently through empty spaces. Some patients said she was crying, others that she was simply observing. Night shift workers also reported strange experiences. Shadows that shouldn't be there, doors that opened on their own, footsteps echoing in wards that were completely empty. You can rationalize this as collective hallucinations in an environment of extreme stress. But the consistency of the reports over decades raises unsettling questions. Today, Riverview is not abandoned in the traditional sense. The place has 24-hour security guards, surveillance cameras throughout the perimeter, and intruders are identified and prosecuted rigorously. Authorities take the site's security extremely seriously, not only for structural reasons, but because Riverview has become a magnet for urban explorers, ghost hunters, and curious people in general. A journey behind the scenes of this gigantic complex would reveal secrets that many families prefer to keep buried. But if Riverview represents the industrial scale of psychiatric suffering, number 4 takes us back to the origins of this whole story. The Provincial Lunatic Asylum in Toronto, Ontario, was Canada's first official psychiatric asylum, opened in 1850. This place set precedents that would influence all institutions that came after. And unfortunately, many of these precedents were based on ignorance, prejudice, and a mentality that viewed people with mental illnesses as less than human. The so-called moral treatment of the time was brutal in its simplicity. Patients were chained to beds or walls, left in their own excrement, fed irregularly, and physically punished for any behavior deemed inappropriate. The most shocking revelations about the Provincial Lunatic Asylum came decades after its closure, when researchers finally gained access to the original records. Meticulously preserved documents showed that a significant portion of the inmates had no diagnosis of mental illness whatsoever. They were poor people without a place to live, immigrants who didn't speak English and were considered problematic, women who defied social norms of the time, people whose families simply wanted to get rid of them. The impact of this discovery was devastating, revealing that the asylum functioned both as a medical institution and as a tool of social control. Perhaps the most macabre detail left by the Provincial Lunatic Asylum are the physical marks that still exist. In the containment rooms that partially survived before complete demolition, investigators found deep fingernail marks on the walls, marks made over years by desperate people trying to get out, trying to escape, scratching concrete and wood until their fingers bled. Today, the building no longer exists. It was demolished and replaced by urban development, but the cemetery remains, hidden beneath a public park where families picnic, unaware that they are literally standing over hundreds of bodies of people forgotten by history. Write in the comments, history needs to be remembered, because as we approach the top 3 spots on this list, the level of disturbance reaches levels that challenge our ability to comprehend how human beings were capable of doing this to other human beings. Moving into the top 3, we need to talk about a place that serves as a watershed moment in this journey through Canada's most terrifying hospitals. The Penetanguishene Mental Health Centre, located in Ontario, opened its doors in 1859, and from the beginning, it had a different purpose than other asylums. This was not a place for people with common mental illnesses. Penetanguishene was specifically designed to house those whom society considered the most dangerous criminally insane in the country. We're talking about serial killers, people who committed acts of extreme violence, individuals whose crimes were so disturbing that even conventional prisons didn't want to deal with them. The mentality behind this institution was that these patients needed to be simultaneously punished and treated, a philosophical contradiction that resulted in decades of questionable practices. The behind-the-scenes story of Penetanguishene reveals a reality even darker than official records admit. The maximum security wing had completely padded cells, where patients considered extremely violent were sometimes kept for years at a time. Sensory isolation in these cells was total. No windows, no outside sounds, no reference to time or space. The psychological impact of this type of confinement is devastating, even for mentally healthy people. Imagine for someone already dealing with severe disorders. But the padded cells were just the beginning. Leaked documents over the years suggest that Penetanguishene functioned as a kind of laboratory for behavioral tests, experiments that tested the limits of the human psyche under extreme conditions of stress and deprivation. Employees who worked in the old wards report experiences that defy explanation. Whispers coming from empty cells, footsteps echoing in corridors where no one should be, the constant feeling of being watched by something invisible. One former employee described in an interview how he felt an oppressive presence whenever he had to enter the original building. A feeling of weight on his chest that only disappeared when he left the building. And here is the most chilling detail about Penetanguishene. The place is still partially operational. There is a modern facility next to the historic building where forensic patients are still treated today. But the original 1859 building is permanently sealed, with access permitted only to duly authorized researchers. The authorities are extremely strict about who can enter, and there are unconfirmed rumors that certain files about what happened there will never be made public. The hidden truth behind places like Penetanguishene is that the line between psychiatric treatment and punishment was practically non-existent. Patients were subjected to painful procedures, not as a genuine attempt at healing, but as a form of control and domination. The transformation of human beings into objects of study, into problems to be managed instead of people to be helped, permeates the entire history of these institutions. And that brings us to number 2, a place that perhaps represents the pinnacle of institutionalized cruelty, disguised as medical science. Sunnyside Hospital in Manitoba operated for over a century. From 1886 to 1990, it began with a name that shocks us today for its casual cruelty: asylum for the insane and idiots. That was literally the medical term of the time, reflecting a mentality that viewed people with intellectual disabilities or mental illnesses as subhuman, as social problems that needed to be isolated and controlled. The decisions made within Sunnyside throughout its decades of operation represent some of the darkest chapters in Canadian medical history. Sunnyside was the site of a systematic eugenics program that sterilized hundreds of patients without their consent. The logic behind this practice was that people with mental illnesses or disabilities should not have the ability to reproduce, to prevent their conditions from being passed on to future generations. This racist and ableist pseudoscience resulted in forced surgeries that permanently destroyed the reproductive capacity of people who often did not even understand what was being done to them. The generational impact of this policy is immeasurable. Entire families were prevented from existing by decisions made by doctors who believed they were improving society. But forced sterilization was just one of Sunnyside's barbaric practices. Extreme hydrotherapy was used as a form of punishment and control. Patients were immersed in tubs of ice water for hours on end, until their physical and psychological resistance was completely broken. Some died of hypothermia, others developed pneumonia and other complications. And perhaps the most disturbing image of Sunnyside is that of the so-called cribs, cage beds, where adults were literally locked up like babies. Wooden and metal structures that imprisoned patients in a fetal position, preventing any movement, used for days or weeks as punishment for behaviors considered inappropriate. Today, Sunnyside is completely abandoned, surrounded by fences and danger signs on all sides. But locals insist the place isn't truly empty. Reports of lights moving through windows at night, shadows appearing and disappearing, sounds that shouldn't exist in an abandoned building. It could be collective suggestion. It could be imagination fueled by the horrific stories everyone knows. Or it could be that some places absorb so much suffering that it remains ingrained in the walls, the floors, the very air. Comment below. Justice for the victims, because now we've reached the most difficult point on this list. The place that represents the worst of the worst, a place where innocence was systematically destroyed, where childhoods were stolen, and where the true horror doesn't come from supernatural stories, but from human cruelty documented in official records. Number 1 on this list could be none other than Woodlands School, located in New Westminster, British Columbia. And I need to warn you before continuing. This story is deeply disturbing, not because it involves ghosts or unexplained phenomena, but because every word I'm about to say is documented, verified, undeniable truth. Woodlands represents one of the most shameful chapters in Canadian history. A place where decisions made by adults in positions of authority destroyed thousands of young lives. What makes Woodlands different from all the other places we've explored so far is simple and devastating. We're talking about children. Opened in 1878 as the Provincial Asylum for the Insane, the complex already carried a dark history even before its most terrible transformation. But it was in 1950 that Woodlands assumed its cruelest function, being converted into a residential school for children with physical and intellectual disabilities. The mentality of the time viewed these children as social problems, as burdens on their families and on society. Parents were convinced, sometimes pressured, to entrust their children to Woodlands care with the promise that they would receive specialized treatment, proper education, and a chance at a better life. The truth hidden behind these promises was unimaginable. More than 3,000 children passed through Woodlands between 1950 and 1996. 3,000 young lives entrusted to an institution that operated more like a prison than a school or hospital. Documents that surfaced decades later revealed a system of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse that was not only frequent but systematic. Staff abused children knowing they had no voice, that their families wouldn't visit them, that society had essentially forgotten they existed. The generational impact of this institutional betrayal is something Canada is still processing. But the sexual and physical abuse was only part of the horror. Woodlands functioned as a laboratory where unauthorized medical experiments were conducted on defenseless children. Experimental drug tests, unnecessary surgical procedures, studies on pain and endurance that would never receive ethical approval in any civilized context. Children were treated literally as guinea pigs, as disposable objects in the name of a science that was anything but scientific. And when these children resisted, when they cried, when they rebelled in the only way they could, they were punished with calculated cruelty. The dark rooms at Woodlands were tiny, windowless, lightless spaces where children were locked up for days or weeks at a time as punishment. Imagine a 5, 6, or 7-year-old child with disabilities that already made their life infinitely more difficult, being thrown into total darkness, alone, terrified, without understanding why they were being punished. Some children were chained to their beds at night, prevented from moving, forced to urinate and defecate where they slept. Staff who witnessed these practices and remained silent are as guilty as those who carried them out. Woodlands survivors, now courageous adults who have found the strength to tell their stories, recount how staff referred to them as vegetables and discards. These words perfectly capture the inhumane mentality that permeated the institution. These children were not seen as people with inherent dignity, with potential, with a right to love and care. They were seen as problems, as inconvenient things that needed to be managed and controlled. And then we come to the most devastating detail of this whole story. 286 children died in Woodlands. 286 children who entered that place alive and never left. The official causes of death recorded in many cases are vague, incomplete, suspiciously generic. Later investigations suggest that the real number may be even higher. There is a cemetery on the grounds where Woodlands stood, but no one knows exactly how many bodies are buried there. How many children died from neglect, abuse, experiments gone wrong? How many were simply left to die because no one cared enough to keep them alive? These questions haunt Canada to this day. After decades of silence, survivors finally managed to force the government to acknowledge the horrors of Woodlands. In 2012, the building was finally demolished, but not before an arduous battle by courageous people who insisted their stories be heard. Today, the site is empty, marked only by a memorial plaque to the victims. The area is completely off limits to the public, and local authorities maintain vigilance, especially after nightfall. And it is during the night that the most disturbing accounts emerge. Paranormal investigators who obtained special permission to visit the site report experiences that defy any rational explanation. Children's crying voices echo where there should be no sound. Apparitions of children dressed in clothes from decades past are seen briefly before disappearing. But more than visions or sounds, what everyone reports is an oppressive feeling of sadness and despair that hangs over the empty grounds. It's as if the suffering of 3,000 children has become ingrained in the very soil, creating an atmosphere of melancholy so dense that it is physically palpable. Sounds of chains being dragged, echoes of muffled cries, the sensation of small hands touching visitors. Write in the comments, never forget, because the journey behind the scenes of this story reveals something fundamental about how we choose to remember or forget the darkest parts of our collective history. The way we choose to remember or forget the darkest parts of our collective history. These places we explore today are not merely settings for horror stories or locations for thrillers. They are grim, permanent, and necessary reminders of how society treated those it considered different, inconvenient, or unwanted. The true horror of these institutions doesn't come from ghosts wandering the corridors or inexplicable paranormal phenomena. The true horror is what human beings, educated people, people with families, people with consciences were capable of doing to other human beings. And the question remains, what has really changed? Have we evolved enough, or have we simply learned to hide our cruelties better? If you've made it this far with me on this heavy, disturbing, but absolutely necessary journey, I want to sincerely thank you. I know it's not easy to face these truths, to delve so deep into the darkest aspects of history. And if you're thinking about learning even more about these places, I have news. The next video will feature real images from inside some of these abandoned hospitals, rare photos, original documents, records that very few people have had access to. So subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell, because this is just the first part of a much larger series about haunted places and forgotten stories of Canada. And I want to know from you. Leave a comment if you would have the courage to enter any of these hospitals we explored today. Would it be Woodlands, Riverview, or would you stay far away from all of them? And if you really made it to the end of this video, write below, I will not forget, because that's the only way to honor the victims of these institutions, keeping their stories alive, preventing them from being erased by time or convenience. Please like the video as well, because it shows me that this type of in-depth, investigative, and honest content resonates with you. And tell me, which other country would you like me to explore in search of abandoned places and disturbing stories? The United States, England, Japan. There's a video over here that perfectly complements this topic, exploring another dark side of Canadian history. Click and continue with me there, because the journey through the darkest mysteries is only just beginning. Until the next mystery. If you have the courage to return,